John Wick is an action revenge movie starring Keanu Reeves that emphasizes inventive choreography and expansive world building. So let's make our way through the series on the way to Chapter 4. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I'd like to make a dinner reservation for 12.
Really? You didn't go with, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back?
Oh, that's such a big, bombastic one, and I'm saving that for the sequel, so...
Okay. Well, yes, obviously, we're here to talk about John Wick, if it wasn't obvious. This is a movie podcast where we work through franchises and subgenres and themes and things like that. This is the beginning of the John Wick franchise, just in time so that we can cover John Wick 4 when it's released. So, yeah, we worked through the 3 movies that are already, and then finishing up with number 4. And, yeah, so that's came out in 2014. We'll start spoiler-free, as we always do. It is the action franchise starring Keanu Reeves, known for its, sort of choreography and gunplay, yeah. I guess, would be how I'd put it.
It's a... I don't want to say a realistic, because it is so over the top in how they're doing everything, but it's very gritty. It's very down-to-earth levels of action.
It is and it isn't. Is what I would say. Because yeah, I mean, we'll get into all that as we go. But that's had a lot of buzz when it came out in 2014. 9 years old now. Time flies, because it still feels like a new movie. But we got 4 on the way, obviously, which, you know, within the next month. We have 5 on the way. I don't know if that's next year or the year after, but, you know, they announced 4 and 5 back to back, basically. There's a female-led spin-off, apparently, rumored or in development of some kind. There's supposed to be a TV show called The Continental happening somewhere.
I missed that one. Okay.
Yeah. I want to say it might be on Amazon that they're making it, but so you know, everything has to be a universe. Everything has to have spin-offs and expansions.
Yes, but as we'll get into in this review, I feel like this movie opened with its lore. Like it even in installation 1 of this franchise, they were like, no, there's a deeper underworld to this that they would love to explore if given the chance. And then, yeah, they were given the chance of all these sequels. So I think that has always been something they wanted to play with.
Yeah, I could see that. I was actually kind of excited about coming into doing this movie, because when I watched it in 2014, because you hadn't seen this before, right?
I have not.
No. So I had seen the first 2 before, and I watched this soon after it came out. Like, I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it maybe later that year. You know, but it had a lot of buzz, and I went into it with a lot of hype that, oh, like, you know, proper action movies are back, that kind of vibe. And I enjoyed it well enough, but I did kind of feel a little underwhelmed by it, because the hype for it was so... Yeah. It was so high. It was so, like, oh, you know, like, you know, Keanu saying, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. That was basically the action of a lot of people on Twitter at the time, was, oh, action movies, like, you know, not superhero movies, action movies are back. Right. Because of John Wick. So I kind of went into it with some sort of loftier expectations. But there's things about it I didn't like at the time. There were some things that didn't work for me as well at the time. So I was curious to sort of come back into it now, basically a decade later, detached from that original feeling, and just sort of like, okay, let's just watch it now that it's been a decade.
Without the hype of John Wick 4 influencing.
Without the hype influencing it, just, you know, I can just view it for as it is, and we can get into it. So that's kind of where I was coming into this one. I always enjoyed it, but I definitely wasn't as in awe of it as everyone was at the time. But that said, the premise of John Wick is that John Wick, obviously, is the title character, played by Keanu Reeves. He loses his wife to an illness. The movie kind of starts off just picking up after her death, and one of his wife's final sort of acts is that she arranged for a present, a delivery of a dog, so that he wouldn't be alone after her death, because she knew how he would be, so she wanted him to have someone to sort of mourn with. And some assholes, I'll just say, kill his dog and steal his car, and we're slowly kind of introduced that they might have made a big mistake and F with the wrong man. And I'll just leave it there. We'll get into everything else later.
I So I know you're not huge into Disney movies, but I have to assume you know about the intro to Up.
Of course, yes. I've seen Up.
Yes. Which, of course, is always regarded as, like, just the biggest gut punch in, like, any sort of emotional tale. It's just opens with this hugely emotional thing of, here's everything is good, and then it just turns bad, and it hits you. This one starts with it being bad, then goes back to good, only to rip it out of your hands again, which I feel is so much worse.
Yeah, so obviously it's kind of a revenge story largely, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Yeah, it's that's basically. So I guess we'll get into things. David, what did you think of John Wick?
I mean, obviously, this franchise, as we're doing it, we're coming off the tail end of the Turtles movies, and we had a whole thing in there of the 2014 Turtles just being the most generic sort of action film.
Which, funny enough, same year as this.
Yes, exactly. But this is, while it is an action film, it is such a different class of action film. It is such a step up. I can see why there was so much hype around it when it came out, because if Turtles was the generic, here's what you're going for, a action film in theaters, this was such a change in the right direction of, no, it has a perfectly well done plot behind it in motivating the characters. It builds up the suspense, it builds up the theatrics of the whole thing, and the action scenes, because they are directed by a former stuntman himself, they are a masterclass. Everything feels purposely done. Nothing just feels like, okay, just swing some punches and then we'll just film it. It's no, everything here is a beautifully done dance, and the visuals match it as well. So honestly, I find it hard to fault much at all with this movie. Obviously, it does have a few little moments here or there, but for the most part, it was a well thought out action film from beginning to end, and it was wildly entertaining.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with most of that, to be honest. I think it was probably a breath of fresh air at the time, because it was. In some ways, it's more advanced and like a new direction for action in the way that it handles choreography. But for the most part, I would say it was actually a throwback to an action movie of a prior era, which is the simple, badass action hero who is kind of this catharsis for the audience, because it's like that fantasy of like someone messes with you, but they mess with the wrong person, and he is going to be an unstoppable force to like get to the bad guys. Like that's effectively what the movie is. It's that wish fulfillment in fantasy. And on that level, it works really well. The action scenes, by and large, are very slick. They're very purposeful, like you say. It's fun to actually watch the fights, as opposed to the fights just being there because we're supposed to have fights. Particularly, there's like a nightclub segment roughly right in the middle of the movie, which is kind of the standout sort of chunk. That 10-minute chunk is kind of the pinnacle of the whole thing. You know, so no, I still enjoy it. I still feel pretty similar to what I did before, and I think it's pretty good, but I wouldn't call it amazing. I actually think the second one's a little bit better. And I think part of that may just be because I think part of it's the tone at the start specifically. It's like it's going for this like grey, depressing, he's just lost his wife serious tone. And don't get me wrong, I would rather take this like overly serious start to the movie than something that's self-aware and cracking jokes about what it is. But you know, most action movies of this type from days gone by are a little lighter, just in the sense that there's a little bit of a cheesier vibe. And I'm not saying I want this to be cheesy. It's just not quite as like it's literally grayscale almost, and there's rain and there's lots of quiet shots of him standing there, and it's just like so miserable. And it's actually really funny to think about all the mythology it sets up as the movie goes on. You wouldn't expect it from those first 10 minutes, which is just this quiet short film about a guy like bonding with his dog. And then, you know, it spirals from there.
Just to go on the color grading of it, I feel like it's an intentional choice, because as you say, later on in the movie, he gets back into this world, and the world is very vibrant. Like everywhere he goes, it's very colorful, it's very big. And very briefly at the beginning of the movie, we get glimpses, like short little flashback shots of him and his wife before she got her illness. And they are also very color filled. They are very vibrant in the same sort of way.
Oh, for
so
sure.
I feel like the intention is obviously these are the two things that give any sort of meaning to John's life. Either it was his wife or it was this life he walked away from. And I think that it was very intentional for it to be grayscale in the beginning because it's the part where he does not have anything at all to work on, anything to do.
No,
So,
I mean, I get the intention. I understand why they've made that choice. And I'm not even necessarily critiquing the choice that's been made. More just that, I guess part of me, both in the first viewing when I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but just kind of like guessing because it seemed, relatively straightforward where it was going. And then on a second viewing, knowing exactly where it's going, it does kind of feel like you're just waiting for something bad to happen to kickstart the plot as opposed to... there's kind of a feeling I have at the start of this movie that I'm just kind of waiting for it to kick into like what it actually is going to be.
Right.
And my other sort of like kind of critique of the pacing and plot would probably be that the last 15-20 minutes, give or take, felt a little bit like after my crescendo to me. Like I felt like it finished what I wanted from it, and then it tried to like do an extra bit of plot to make me care about another ending, and I'm like, you know what? Like, this doesn't matter as much as what was already accomplished beforehand.
Yeah, it definitely, the entire plot, without spoiling anything, is all centered around doing one specific thing, and then he does it, and like you said, there's another 15 minutes after that where they over the course of the movie, you could tell they were trying to add this on instead of like, no, this is like the new game plus. Like, we're going to be doing this little bit extra afterwards. It's the final boss. But it's like, is it though? Because emotionally, I'm only tied to the one thing that you've said.
Yeah. So not only is it finished what it felt like the main purpose of the movie was, story-wise, I would also argue that, well, it's fine. I don't think any of the action in that last 15 minutes comes close to some of the middle stuff in the movie.
Yeah, I'd say so. They with, again, trying not to spoil anything, but that's in the very beginning of the movie, they set up that he is really good at driving his cars. Like, he's practically just a stunt driver, more or less. That's, I feel, the only point where it really comes into play is that last scene.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, they could have just cut out the setup, and then that would have easily allowed them to cut out the ending. But since they did do the whole thing of he's a car guy, I think that that's the only place where it really could have showed up, all things considered.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, because I remembered it being more egregious in my first viewing. I remembered like the main thing being wrapped up like closer to the halfway point, and it's not really. It's actually more like 20 minutes before the end. But, but it still had that feeling of like the actual conclusion feels a little tacked on when I was already done. I was already emotionally satisfied and felt like I got to the end of the story. So that's my biggest complaint about it. Like, so I have a little bit of a problem with the tone at the start, just feeling a little bit too like just like cold and like we're doing depressing drama before the revenge story kicks in. But the bigger problem, I think, is that it peaks and the story even wraps up soon after it peaks. But then there's like an extra bit where they try to make you care, and they try to make you care about another final conflict, and I don't think it quite works. But
that's fair.
Obviously, the action is very good, and it's shot pretty well by and large throughout. Like there's a really nice moment. Just one little thing that I don't think, just getting into too much details. There's a great moment where he like stabs someone in the background while someone's like at a mirror in the bathroom, and it's just this really slick little thing that he does, and it just is like. I think that's like one of the key things to good action is like I always care about geography in an action scene. If I'm not kind of aware of where people are in the scene in relation to each other, so I don't understand like how close they are to being a threat to each other and things like that, it doesn't work. But that makes, if you can understand that and they're fighting, that makes a potentially compelling action scene. If you add onto that cool slick things that make sense in the context of that, which is what this movie is mostly trying to do, and usually succeeds, to be fair, it's doing the little things where you remember the little set piece moments, you remember fun little ways that he defended himself or killed someone or whatever. So,
I mean, I think one of the things that I remember hearing about the most when it came out was that this was one of the, I'm not gonna say only movies, but one of the few movies that really cared about the clip count of how many bullets can a gun realistically fire. And then it shows him having to stop and reload his gun. And they structure the action around that. They make it interesting that instead of him just being like, okay, hold on, a timeout, just gotta click. Okay, now we can start the action again. It's like, no, people are still shooting at him the whole time.
It's part of
he has to make it work.
It's part of the choreography, is the reloads. And that's the weird thing that's so annoying about most movies not dealing with that, is that rules and limitations are what ultimately make the things impressive when the characters can incorporate it and overcome it. It's why whenever I'm talking to Tim about a horror movie that's usually centered around a ghost or something supernatural, if they don't establish rules with what the strengths and weaknesses are with the entity or with the supernatural element, then it's hard to get invested in the third act when they're trying to fight against it. Because if there's no rules established, then it's like, well, the bad spirit or whatever can just do whatever it wants and no one has a chance. But if you set up rules, you set up limitations, then those limitations offer boundaries that you can work in, and everything's very contextual around it. I think it's the same thing with this, is that having action scenes where they have to incorporate, like, okay, there's only 15 shots in the gun, so once he's got these 15 shots off, he has to find time to reload. You know, is he ducking at that point? Is he defending at that point? Like there's it. Not only does it make it feel more impressive because it feels a little bit more realistic, it also, and not that I'm saying the action is realistic per se, because it's obviously he's like a superhero the way he's going through people. Absolutely. But it also, I think, helps like designing it, because it gives you, see when you're the creator making those scenes, it gives you these like chapters where, okay, this is where this part has to end because the gun's out of ammo, so this is where he drops it and does something else, or how he finds time to reload. Like, it almost helps you structure the action scene a little bit, because it's not just constant mowing down.
Yeah, I also think, going off that rules thing, that also is a benefit to the whole movie, because even outside the action scenes, this entire world, this entire life that John Wick has, everyone in it is highly structured and everyone has rules to it, rather than it being this chaotic sort of thing of like, yeah, no, you could walk down the street and just get shot. Like, it's just going to happen and you're not even going to know it's there. You feel like there is this tension where he could be shot at any point, but you're going to be able to see it coming, because they've set up that it can only happen in certain locations and other places he's safe at. It gives you that ability to breathe in certain scenes without having to like think, oh, is someone going to walk in right now and just open fire?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So there's a decent bit of world building, which obviously the second one kind of expands upon. No, and obviously there's a lot of stuff here to still explore. I remember seeing this though and thinking, yeah, that kind of feels like it's a good ending. Like, you could sort of just read this as the end of the story. He's went through his arc and it's done. We'll talk in spoilers what that arc is and how it does end, obviously. But there is a lot of room open to expand and sort of like do more in the world. Even if arguably the character should maybe be left alone after this. But ultimately, like, the temptation to have him do more cool action shit is just too tantalizing.
And honestly, I think that's the best thing you really can do when you're not guaranteed sequels, because obviously they went into John Wick, the first movie, and it's like, okay, we're making this movie, it's going to be cool action, but they didn't know if they were going to get John Wick chapters 2 through 5 as it currently stands. They told a single one-off story with its own complete narrative there, and they left the threads open of saying, okay, we can do this, we can do that. It's the same sort of thing that during the Turtles franchise we complained about it being, they set up these big things at the end of the Out of the Shadows movie of like, oh, this is going to come back in the third movie, but it's like, don't, because you don't know it's there.
But what I'm saying is, though, is I kind of felt when they announced John Wick 2, I was like, I didn't really need a sequel. And I'm not saying to the same extent as this, but, back when we did Dirty Harry, we said at the end of the first Dirty Harry, it was like, well, what's the sequel given where he ends? And obviously that was a really egregious franchise, and that the sequels just ignored what happened at the end because
of every other movie.
Yeah. So it's not like that. Like, it doesn't feel like it betrays what happens at the end here to do anything it does in the sequel. So and that's a conversation more for the sequel anyway. But that was definitely one of the feelings I had when I saw it originally. But like, fundamentally, it's kind of an old-fashioned action movie with a badass hero and villains who are kind of despicable. I mean, not all of them, admittedly. Some of them are a bit more diplomatic, but obviously the main one that you hate is just this despicable piece of shit. Which,
I did make the comparison halfway through my watching. Of course, it had to come up of Equilibrium with the gun kata, just because this movie is half gunfight, half martial arts.
Yeah.
And they blend the two together pretty seamlessly throughout. And it feels like this is probably what the gun kata from Equilibrium should have been. Not this precision of like, oh, it lands the most precise points, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's just people who are so good at their craft that you literally can't even tell that they are just shooting wildly at some points.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I would say about the action scenes. Like on top of just it being like a dance and being like choreography, it always feels like everyone he kills in these scenes, and they're all bad guys, right? He doesn't just kill innocent people. Is they all feel like very strategic executions, and it always feels like he knows who to go for first. There's moments where he'll be like struggling with someone, and he'll hold them down and then shoot someone else before he turns back to the person that he was fighting with, because they're actually a threat because they can shoot him from where they are. So he takes them out first and then goes to the other one. There's a lot of times where he'll do 2 quick shots in the chest because it's the easy target to hit because it's the mass area, but he'll always finish them off with a headshot just to confirm the kill and make sure they're down. Absolutely. There's a lot of those little moments throughout the action scenes. It always feels very methodical, even though it's very quick and visceral in the way it's presented, because it's like they're fighting for their lives. But he feels like he's a surgeon going through his job, just doing what he's mechanically learned to do. And obviously the movie teases that he's the best at what he does, and
oh, absolutely,
all that stuff.
One of the things in this movie that I was a little bit off by during the first fight scene, because the big first fight scene happens, I would say, I think it's at like the 20 or 30 minute mark of the movie. He just kind of seems omnipotent, like all-knowing of where every person is for that first fight scene. And I guess it could come down to, he knows his house, he knows the layout, he knows, based off of his operations, how people would be moving through it if they were professionals. So I can forgive that one. And then in later fight scenes, I thought it was going to be the same issue, where he's just, he immediately knows there are 3 guys around this corner and he's going to take them out perfectly. But no, you can see, especially during the nightclub scene, this, I don't want to say panicked, but just this look in his eye where he's constantly looking around, trying to get his grasp on the layout of the area and where people are. And like you said, where the next threat is, the thing that he needs to take care of next. And I really appreciate the movie for that, of not making him feel like he walks into this place and be like, just immediately knows where everyone is.
Yeah, I think it sort of does a bit of a balance of like making him feel like he is this like Terminator style like badass, whilst also feeling like he's still having to like, he's still a human being who's having to figure this out. Maybe the argument for that first scene, because that first action scene you're talking about takes place in his house, maybe the argument is that it's in his house with the lights out, it's his domain, it's his, he knows it back to front, so that's
You're
why
in my turf now.
Yeah, pretty much. So maybe that's why he's so good at it in that particular scene. But yeah, I think that's there. One of the things I was going to say is that obviously this has had knockoffs, and like that movie Nobody starring Bob Odenkirk just came out a couple years ago. I was actually going to accuse The Equalizer of being like a knockoff because it's very similar in a lot of ways, but it came out the same year as this, so I think that just proves that the plot of this movie is not doing anything original, right? Like, nothing about the plot itself is like breaking ground or anything. But
I think the hype and the love for it really does come from A, the visual style, the choreography, and B, this world that they are building up, because it almost strikes me as sort of like a comic book world where there's just this behind the scenes thing that the average person doesn't know about, but it's so mired in its own continuity and its own rules.
Instead of superheroes with secret identities, it's hitmen with secret identities.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you got this. I mean, the fact that, and we'll get into it, but the Continental, this hotel, plays such a central point of.
It's Switzerland for hitmen.
Pretty much, and it's to the point where I'm sure John could have just staged this whole revenge plot out of his own house, and it would have been fine. But he knows that there are rules to the Continental, and it allows him to basically have a base of operations, and it's just this whole world being built up that I don't feel like it goes overboard on. You never have somebody sitting at the camera being like, well, John, as you know, here in the Continental we have many rules that you need to follow. Number one, it's like, no, we just learn them organically over the course of the movie, what is and is not allowed.
Well, there's some smart editing good on there, because there's a moment where one of the villains like brings up the rules of the Continental, and then it cuts to like another character saying it to John Wick, and it kind of like, you kind of from the editing pieces together parts of different scenes to sort of tell the story of what the rules are in the moment. So the editing's doing part of the job of putting those things together.
But even then, the editing puts together two scenes of one person saying, here are the rules, John, and the scene that's directly contrasting it is, yeah, we can break those rules. Like, they aren't hard and fast. They are still breakable rules. But
there's possibly consequences for breaking the rules that are established.
Absolutely.
What's worth mentioning is the director of this movie, the one that's credited, because there's two directors, one uncredited, one credited. The one that's credited, Chad Stahelski.
Yes.
So he's only directed John Wick and then 2 and 3. And obviously he's got 4, which is coming out. He's got like 10 movies listed as upcoming on IMDb. I'm going to list these, right? So you get John Wick Chapter 4. He's also attached to make the Highlander remake. He's attached to the Ghost of Tsushima movie based on the video game. He's attached to something called Classified, something called Shibumi, something called Black Samurai, something called Rain, something called Sandman Slim, something called Kill or Be Killed, and something called Gangsters of Shanghai. Although 2 of them are TV miniseries, admittedly, but that's still a lot of projects like lined up. So if nothing else, you can definitely say that the people behind this movie are getting a lot of work because of the success of John Wick.
Absolutely. And then I believe, I could be mistaken here, but I believe the uncredited director, he did the Deadpool films. Unfortunately, as we will eventually get to, Fast and Furious, Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah, that sounds right, yeah.
And Bullet Train was one of his most recent releases.
Bullet Train was actually pretty good. I actually quite enjoyed that. I never finished Atomic Blonde, which he also did. Deadpool movies, I can take or leave. So, David Leitch definitely is not one that... he's definitely not one that I have a lot of like attachment to be honest. Like, outside of his uncredited work on John Wick, because he's not listed here as uncredited on the other ones, it's just this first one. So outside of that, I mean, yeah, Bullet Train's probably my favorite of his, and then the other things that I've seen from him haven't done much for me, but you know, it's kind of funny though, because when Atomic Blonde came out, there was a lot of like, oh, is this like Lady John Wick?
I remember that,
you know, and I ended up just stopped watching, because it was definitely, it went way more into the spy stuff, and I find spy stuff to be quite dry outside of a few key exceptions.
That's fair.
So I wasn't super into it, but because obviously there's a little bit of spy stuff in this, but it's more Hitman than it is spy stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the characters of this movie, without getting too much in spoilers, obviously Keanu Reeves as the lead does a good job. Surprising is, I would say, the most surprising character for me was Willem Dafoe as kind of an old-time friend in the industry.
I forgot he was in this, if I'm honest.
Yeah. He popped up in like one of the first scenes to give his condolences to John, and I'm like, oh, you're going to be in this movie a lot, aren't you, Willem? Because you don't just pop up in the beginning for no reason.
There's a few... I mean, you say that, but like... I don't know if you watched Glass Onion when it came out, but Ethan Hawke popped up for one scene early on and then just disappeared for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
That's like, that was weird, but alright.
That being said, I did read, because I did watch Glass Onion when it came out, I did read that apparently he was just on set and they were like, hey, you want to be in the movie? And it's like, yeah, sure. So
that's pretty funny. But yeah, so there's a few faces in here that are recognizable. Adrianne Palicki plays another hitman, and she... people will know. I know her from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but people will know her for the Orville as well, and a couple other things. Dean Winters, who we just saw in Out of the Shadows, the Turtles movie, is in here. I forgot he was in this, but he's actually a relatively big part. You know, he's
I mean, in terms of IMDb, 5th credited, so pretty good.
You got him. John Wick's dead wife is played by Bridget Moynahan, who I've seen in a few things over the years.
Which, I mean, all credit to her. She did a good job, but like, she may as well have just been an extra in this movie.
Oh yeah, like it's not a big part, but like
Yeah.
they went out their way to get some, not like a huge name by any means, but someone who actually has acting credits and stuff. You know, because like I want to say I mainly know her from Coyote Ugly of all things, but she's definitely popped up in a few things over the years.
Just looking through her thing here, I know her from The Sum of All Fears. That's one of my favorite Jack Ryan films.
I don't have a favorite Jack Ryan film. I don't even know if I've seen a Jack Ryan film.
I'm sorry, that's one of my tiny little idiosyncrasies. I don't watch a lot of action, but for some reason, Jack Ryan, I'm well versed in.
Yeah. We also have John Leguizamo in this, who I can't seem to stay away from because New Year's Eve, I happened to watch the Assault on Precinct 13 remake. He was in that.
Okay.
I then watched The Menu. He's in that. We've just done John Wick. And, you know, there's a connection to next month's movies because he's going to be in one of the video game movies we're going to talk about. So...
You were actually complaining off camera last week that you thought Megan Fox was going to make up your like most watched actress just because of what movies were going to be coming up. But I think John Leguizamo is going to take the top spot of most watched actor.
Yeah, but one of those was right before the start of the year, so I don't know if he will. I think he'll just fall behind. I'll have 4 Keanu Reeves by the time we're done with John Wick, though. So I mean,
true.
He'll be high up in the list. What's so funny is I was expecting Lawrence Fishburne to show up in this, but apparently he didn't show up till the second one.
Oh, okay.
That's why I was expecting it, because like I'm like,
where's
Lawrence
Like,
Fishburne?
what in this movie would have suggested Lawrence Fishburne was going to show up besides the Matrix cast is kind of just reuniting?
Yeah, well, he's in the second one, so
okay.
You'll see him then. And obviously,
that being said, I do want to mention there was a doctor character, very low down. He only shows up in one scene, but that guy was the Keymaster from the second Matrix movie.
Oh god, I hate the second Matrix movie.
I'm just saying, they are doing a full reunion here in terms of Matrix cast.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned Lance Reddick earlier. Obviously, he's a very memorable role in here. So yeah, you got a bunch of cast members. I have to say though, what's funny is that the main 2 villains I don't think I really recognize from anything.
So the main villain of Alfie Allen, I think everyone's going to know him as Theon Greyjoy from Game of Thrones. That's kind of his big breakout role.
I'm one of the few people on the planet who quit that show because they didn't like it early on.
I mean, I quit it too, but I got to season like 6 or something like that. And then I don't even know how to pronounce his name. If you have any idea on this, Michael Scrabble word.
Nyqvist.
Nyqvist?
That's what I'd say. Nyqvist.
All right, fair enough.
It's just a Y instead of an I. Nyqvist.
Yep. Michael Nyqvist, he plays the father of Alfie Allen's character. He is a Russian mob boss, and he actually died very shortly after this movie came out. So,
oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yep. He died in 2017, so didn't have a lot more done in the meantime. I think this is one of his last roles, all things considered.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yep.
Oh, well. Well, I suppose we should probably just say spoilers then and get into the events of the movie, since, you know, we're dancing around things and we've went through the cast, we've talked about the direction, the action scenes, which are definitely the more prominent things to mention. So, yeah. All right. So, like we said, the movie starts with Keanu Reeves being all sad. His wife's funeral happens. He gets a dog.
Well, technically, the movie starts with a in media res sort of thing, where it's at the end of the movie. Where he's climbing out of a car, bleeding to death, watching a video of his wife.
Which is right at the end. When we get back to that, it is right at the end of the movie. When that finally comes back. But yeah, you're right. There's a little tease of the ending first. I think that's just to be like, hey, there's going to be action. Don't worry. Look at how bloody he is. There's going to be action.
Guys, please don't walk out when we kill the dog. We swear it's going to get cool.
Yeah. And, you know, it shows that he's not prepared to take care of a dog. You know, he expects the dog to sleep in a little, you know, blanket on the floor, but he eventually gives in and lets the dog come up to the bed. So he's sort of bonding with the dog.
He gives the dog cereal instead of kibble in the morning.
Yeah.
He didn't have kibble. Which I gotta say, I appreciate that this is a nice gesture from the wife of like, no, you need someone to mourn with. Here's a dog. But like, this would be the equivalent of pretty much dropping a human baby on the doorstep and being like, all right, take care of this thing that you didn't know was coming.
I think, I mean, to read into it a little bit, I would say that the idea is here is that she knew what his past was, and that she was kind of this tether that took him out of that bad world that he was in, and that she felt that he probably needed someone else to care for. So this was the idea, is that, you know, give him the dog, and it might have worked. Like, he seemed to be bonding with the dog, and nothing bad was happening. And then it was just
for
kind
like
of
6 hours.
Yeah, but it wasn't anything he did that was a problem, though. He just happened to run into the shithead, Yosef, who, him and his buddies, and he likes John Wick's car, you know, when they're getting gas, and he tries to buy it, and John Wick just says, sorry, she's not for sale, and that's all it is. But of course, Yosef is an entitled rich mob boss's son who is a complete prick.
So yeah, you say during that scene that's all it is, but he's he says everybody has their price in Russian.
Yes.
And he doesn't expect Keanu to know Russian, but then Keanu replies back, not this one, and he speaks it back in Russian. So I feel like that's what set Yosef off of like being made a fool of in that regard, because otherwise I can't tell. Otherwise, him just being pure evil. That's the only thing I could think would have set him off.
I mean, just the idea that someone told no to him and he wants that car. But I mean, honestly, the idea that he's emasculated and like wants revenge because he feels slighted, it feels like it fits everything I think about the character anyway. So I'm not going to argue with you that much.
Pretty much, yeah.
So that night, him and his two buddies, you know, break out of the house, and they blindside John Wick, and they knock him down, and John Wick has to watch as they kill his dog. And it's, you know, I like that, you know, it kind of does this thing where it cuts away for the actual impact, and but you know, you do see Keanu sitting there with like what's, you know, obviously it's a prop, it's not a real dog, but he's sitting there with a dead dog in his arms, and he has to bury it, and he is just kind of walking around like a zombie, and it's very, it still has that thing where you can sort of see him, because like later on where it's like, okay, he's in like super like hitman mode, and he's like mapping out what he's going to do in a situation and stuff. You sort of get this slow zombie version of that where he's just like, oh shit, I don't have a car, I guess I have to get the bus, and he's just like, we're seeing the more regular part of the plan happen. But the first real tease of who he is, because there's nothing really up until this point other than just Willem Dafoe being this old friend of his and he's not in the business anymore. The first sign is when the bad guys, Yosef and his goons, go with the car to this auto shop place that's run by Nyqvist, and he immediately looks at the car and goes, where did you get that car? And it's like, wait, what? And to the point where, and it cuts back and forth a little bit from different scenes, but he eventually tells him to get out, and Yosef's like, we own you, and he's like, you don't own me, and he ends up punching Yosef, and everyone, his buddies are like, wait, the boss isn't, you know, Vigo isn't going to like that, and he's like, no, he won't, but he'll understand when he finds out why I did it. And we see that play out where later that night Vigo phones like Wazamo's character and says, I understood today you hit my son, and he's like, that's right, can you tell me why? He stole John Wick's car. And then it just cuts to Vigo, and he's like, I see. it's like all of a sudden Nyqvist not in trouble anymore, and it's like now his son's the one that's in trouble. And it says this idea that they're all shit scared, that they know who he's done this to.
I actually wrote down in my notes at this point that this movie does a good job of just making the name John Wick sound like it is the boogeyman, which I didn't know what was coming immediately after this scene, but they do a great job of just, all you have to do is say the name, and everyone in this industry immediately knows, like, okay, I'm out, bye, not gonna deal with this. So
obviously we get this scene here where Yosef comes in to the house, or wherever it is, and Vigo starts punching him in the stomach and beating him up and saying, you idiot, you effing idiot, you know what you've done. And he's like, what? It's just, you know, I just stole some car. And obviously this guy's like a mob boss. He doesn't care that his son stole a car. He's not like some ethical dude, right? But he's like, yeah, but it's who you did it to. And he's like, what, that nobody? And he's like, that nobody. And, you know, there's almost a dramatic pause as he says, was John Wick. And he's like, huh? And then, so he explains, we get some exposition from him, and it's like, he explains that he was the best at what he did, blah, blah. And I think it's Yosef who says, what, I stole a car from the boogeyman? He's like, no, you idiot. He's who you sent to kill the boogeyman. Yeah. which is a good line. Because when he explains it, he says that when John Wick wanted out because he'd met a woman and he wanted out of the life, that he didn't really want to let him go, so he gave him a job that no one could have completed, and the idea being that John would probably end up dying, but he did it. He did the mission, and he kind of had to just let him go. Like, he won his freedom, so okay, he got out.
And I really enjoy this scene because it's basically the exposition scene. It's the scene that the good guys use to talk about the bad guys. But instead it's the bad guy talking about the good guy here. It's flipped on it, and it makes it that sort of menacing. And it's all intercut with Keanu using a sledgehammer to break open his garage floor in order to get to his old gear.
Yeah, he's got like a case full of guns and like these gold coins to use as currency.
Yep. And I adore this scene because it's selling him as the guy who can kill the boogeyman.
The unstoppable force.
Everything we've seen of this character beforehand is it's a guy who lost his wife, lost his dog, and got beat up by some teenagers. Like, nothing in that should shout that he is able to do these things. And yet this scene sells it 100% because not only is the guy who did the act scared, the dude's dad, who basically runs the Russian mob, is scared. It builds up of, these are people who we've seen already take advantage of John Wick, and once they learn that it is John Wick, it's like, oh, okay, batten down the hatches, we're going for a ride.
The only thing I'll dispute there is I wouldn't say Yosef's that scared. That's kind of one of the key points of the movie, is that up until John Wick's like right in his face, basically, he's still kind of like an arrogant little shit who doesn't think he should be scared of him, and everyone else is like, you should be terrified.
That's fair. I love the one part at the end of the scene where he's like, Dad, I'll take care of this, and the dad's like, no you won't. You can't do anything. And not because you won't try, it's because you physically cannot stop this man.
Yeah, because he says, like, I'll deal with this, Dad. He's like, how? By finishing what I started. And you can see it in his eyes, like, my child's an idiot. I raised a fool.
Like, he turns back to Dean Winters and is like, was he listening to anything I said?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is that, yeah, it is very much how the heroes usually talk about the villain. But this movie treats it like our main character is the villain to this criminal underworld.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it work is the idea that he used to be a part of this, but now if he is going back, and that's a question that they all ask him, are you back in this now? And then he eventually does have the big line where he says, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. Is that he's back now with, you would assume, or at least it feels like he's back with more of a moral compass, because he lived a normal life with a good, innocent person, and he appreciates what normal life is. Now, I'm not saying that he was a complete prick before. I don't know if he probably had a code, and I assume. But
well, I'm assuming the code is the same as all the other hitmen we've seen, which is you take a contract, you take a job, you don't actually just kill indiscriminately.
Yeah. But I have to assume that he has a bit more of a heart this time now, because he's went through this with his wife, and that's like we get to latch on to him. So it's the guy is maybe, I don't know, maybe remorseful is not quite the right word, but perhaps he's remorseful for some of the things that he's done in his past now, and he's back in a different way. He's a grown character, and it's not so much that we've seen that growth. It's more just a hint of like the bastard that he used to be, and like, but now he's doing it for a purpose that we can get behind because they killed that dog.
I think that the one thing that they do to kind of sell that is while he's giving this big speech and before he's breaking open the sledgehammer stuff is right when they say it was John Wick. They show him in the shower, and up till this point, you know, he's been dressed smartly. He's been going to his wife's funeral. He's been just living life. But this is the first point where you see him in the shower and you get a visual on his back, and it's just head to toe like back tattoos.
Yeah.
Like he is completely covered with all this ink of like the Latin phrase for like fortune favors the strong, and a whole bunch of like reapers and angels and stuff like that. It gives you the sense of this guy that you saw for the first 20 minutes is not the guy you're going to be following for the rest of this movie.
Yeah, and I think it's also this idea that, you know, when he eventually does kill Yosef, or actually it's not even when he kills him, I think it's like after the nightclub scene when he phones him, Yosef's on the phone with him, he says something to the effect of like, you know, it's not actions have consequences, but it is something that means that, basically. It was that kind of sentiment. And I think there's this idea in the movie, because he says it a couple of times to other people when he's talking about his wife, that he lived a life for 4 years that he doesn't think he deserved. And it's the idea that he doesn't think the life he's led deserved the consequences he got with that life. And that maybe in some level he thinks it all falling apart is like, maybe like, not that he believes in karma or anything like that, but maybe he does deserve it for it all to fall apart. He doesn't deserve to have that happiness.
I think that it was Vigo towards the end of the movie that basically just spelled that out. He was like, yeah, we're in a certain kind of life and I let you out. But in the end, we always knew it was going to come back because the things that we have done, the things that you have done are unforgivable. And if there is a God, he is purposely taking away these things that make you happy because of the things you've done.
Yeah, that is what it's about. Can people change? And I think the ending kind of gets to that a little bit. But yeah, it's all this build up to him, and there's a moment after these two scenes playing out side by side where he's breaking out his guns and stuff, and Yosef's getting the shit kicked out of him by his dad. Where Vigo goes into his phone book that he's got in his safe, which is a very similar set of coins that John Wick has to show, yeah, they're part of the same world.
Yep.
He phones John Wick, and John Wick never says a word on the phone. No. But Vigo's like, hey, like, I'm sorry to hear about your wife, and you know, my son's done this thing. I just, we have to, talk about this, like, civilized, adults here. And John Wick doesn't say anything. He just hangs up the phone. And when Dean Winter says, what did he say? Vigo just goes, enough. I really like that as a sort of payoff to like him being quiet.
Oh, absolutely.
So he knows that he's in trouble, and he puts out a contract in John Wick, and so on and so on. So, yeah, so John Wick goes to the Continental. And we find out about this place.
Inside there, the very first thing that happens is the home invasion scene.
Oh, sorry, I'm skipping over this. Yeah, he sends a bunch of people to his home, which makes sense, actually, now I'm thinking about it, because that's kind of what prompts him to go to the Continental, is that his home gets shot up and invaded by a force. So, yeah, because before he puts out a contract, he just sends Dean Winter, or he gets Dean Winter to send like a team. It's like a SWAT team, but, criminal SWAT team. And they break into his house, but John Wick's expecting it. John Wick's, he's...
And I want to point this out, is that this is the first point in the movie, and for the rest of the movie it will be this: everyone's wearing suits and ties. Everyone is smartly dressed. I have to assume that it's one of those things of, building up the lore. Like, this is a professional thing. This isn't this isn't some thugs breaking into a house and like just doing basically the thing that the son did at the beginning. This is all part of the up and up hitman world that they are building. But it just seems like one of those things that they could never hope to explain, because there's no way that he is tactically any better with wearing a tie at any point.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It just struck me as it's obviously a character. It's the way that we visualize John Wick is wearing this outfit, but they don't ever go through it in the movie of explaining, okay, but why did he put on a suit?
I don't think you need to explain that.
Yeah. In the end, it would have just been a disservice to do so. Yeah. But it's one of those things that I'm like, everyone is wearing a suit at all points in this movie now. And the first thing that goes in my mind is there's parts where he's choking out people, but at no point does he ever grab their tie and just pull. I feel like that should be the easy one.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, so we get this action scene where he takes on this team coming into his house. And it gives you, like, it's not the best action scene in the movie, it just gives you a little bit of a taste. Although my favourite part of this particular scene is, I think it's the very last guy, where he's struggling with them. They're both like, the guy's got a knife and John Wick sort of turns it on him, and it's that thing where he's trying to struggle to push it down. And to eventually win this struggle for strength is he starts like, he keeps a hold of the knife with the other guy's hands with one arm, and then he starts like pounding on his hand like he's hammering something in, and that stabs the guy every time he does it, and that wins him the fight. That's just a fun, inventive way to end a fight scene with a knife.
I also liked shortly before that, there was a scene where there's just, a divider in the room, a little bit of drywall, and there's a guy on either side, John on one and him on the other. And it goes to that bit of omnipotence I was thinking of before, where the one guy turns, John ducks, the guy shoots through the wall, and then John shoots up into where he would, like, the guy's head would be. So despite the fact they never saw each other, they still managed to have a gunfight.
Yeah. It's a fun moment, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's a couple of key things that happen here again, doing some world building. Is that there's a cop who shows up because there was noise complaints, and the cop even sees the dead body lying on the floor, but he's just like, "Hey John," and he's like, "Hey Jimmy," it's like, "Are you like doing professional stuff again?" He's like, "Nah, just sorting out a few things." He's like, "Okay, I'll leave you be then." At least, which says, I mean, I guess you could read it as the police force is so corrupt they just know about the hitmen and stuff, but it's like he just knows not to get involved. It's like this is above my pay grade. I'm not
Yeah, honestly, I really like that scene because it's a humorous beat at the end of this large fight scene, but it also perfectly explains like why are the police never called for any future fight scenes, and the answer is they know not to.
Pretty much. I mean, it said later on Vigo has like blackmail stuff and a lot of like high profile people in the city. You have to imagine that all these like high upper hitmen characters have all got kind of like weird relationships when it comes to the law system.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that this isn't like small time criminals. These are people who are protected, and the police know they're protected, so they don't go near them, kind of thing. And then the other bit of mythology that's kind of introduced here is, first of all, calling for a dinner reservation is actually calling for a cleanup crew, and that's when the cleanup crew guy comes in with these two cleaners, and they clean up the scene. I thought I recognized that actor. I'm just going to double check and see if I know.
Yeah, he seemed very familiar during the scene, but I could not tell you exactly what it was. But I liked that this is the first time.
It was.
Okay.
It looks so different because he's older, but it's David Patrick Kelly, who I know from Commando and Twin Peaks. People might see him in other things. But yeah, that is him in the bowler hat who shows up to do the cleanup crew. Some people probably know him from The Warriors and The Crow. He's in those movies too.
Okay, I definitely seen Warriors. But no, I really like it because this is where it starts setting up the gold coins. Because we obviously saw that John has, when he was using the sledgehammer, one side of the case was a few guns, but then the other side was just full of these gold coins. And obviously they were all collected from jobs that he had picked up throughout the years, but we didn't know what they were for. We had no idea what these coins were used for. And he takes 12 of the coins and he gives it to the guy and says, all right, 12 bodies, 12 coins, here you go. And then it's just done. No questions asked. And that's where we get the understanding that this is the currency that this world uses. That all the hitmen operate off of. Basically, a single gold coin is a no questions asked, do the thing. Which then also lends credence to, for John to have this many coins, just how many people did he kill beforehand?
Yeah, and they are exchanged for different things, so they might have come from not exactly all kills, but yeah, I mean, it gives you the idea that they probably are mostly kills, and gives you a sense of what he's doing. Because, you know, he pays for the Continental with 1 gold coin, and so on. But they definitely do use money for the kills, though, as well, because they, you know, later on, like, there's a $2 million contract on John Wick.
Oh, yeah.
So a bit of both, I suppose. But yeah, he goes to the Continental, and we get this established, and this is the best place to talk about it as any, is that this is a hotel where hitmen and people in that world go to stay, but there are rules. This Continental is safe ground. No one's allowed to attack each other there, and certainly not kill each other there. And if you do, there's severe penalties. In fact, the one character we see in this break that rule is assassinated at the end of the movie for doing so. So it sets up these rules, and they've got like an in-house doctor, because the people who go to the Continental might need one from time to time. So
I do like when they introduce the doctor. It's John comes up to the desk and he's talking to Lance Reddick's character, and he's like, "Do you have a doctor on staff?" He's like, "Yes." And how good is he? He's very good. Okay, send him up. Also, how's your laundry service? As he's just drenched in bullet holes and blood, and it's like, not that good.
Yeah, no laundry service is that good, I think was the exact line.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I think the second movie I remember playing with this idea of it being a safe haven, where they're not allowed to fight, being, I think it uses it even better in the second one from what I remember. Okay. So it really plays with those rules. Whereas here, it is set up, and obviously it's used a little bit with what was her name?
Perkins.
Yeah, the Adrianne character. So yeah, but obviously he's coming for the son. He goes hunting for him. He goes looking and he gets intel of him being at the nightclub. Where does he get that intel from again?
The nightclub. Where does he get that info? I think he just follows the friends.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, he just follows the friend there, and he eventually tortures him to get the main guys downstairs in the bathhouse. But yeah,
which one thing that we skipped over, which does come up, is that Willem Dafoe's character, as we mentioned before, he's approached by Vigo somewhere in here and basically given the contract specifically. The contract is open, anyone can take it, but he wanted Marcus, Willem Dafoe's character, to know about it specifically. And Marcus says that he's going to take it. Marcus says that for $2 million, he's willing to kill John Wick.
Notable though, given the twist later that he's actually doing it to help John Wick and sort of keep an eye out for him, he does notably ask, is it an open contract first? And in the scene, that reads as like, is this an exclusive? I'm not going to have to worry about other people taking it from me. But I think in the context of knowing that he's wanting to protect John Wick, this is him checking, wait, is he in danger from other people? Kind of thing. So, yeah, so it says something like that, yeah. I was probably just going to bring that up when we got to, like, the Marcus stuff, when you know, it became more relevant. But, yeah, so the whole nightclub section is very entertaining. It's, you know, at first you've got all these security teams and they're checking in and they're saying there's no sign of John Wick, everything's good. As John Wick is like going around like Michael Myers taking out security guards.
Before he even gets in there, he comes up against the doorman, the bouncer. And
yeah.
He has a little conversation with him, which apparently in some interviews, the conversation goes as, hey, I think it's like Kevin or something like that. He's like, hey, Kevin, looks like you lost some weight. And Kevin says he lost 60 pounds. And he's like, oh, wow, that's great. How about you go home, Kevin? And Kevin then just lets John in without alerting anybody. But apparently, according to interviews, the 60 pounds was a coded way of saying that there's 60 guys inside.
Ah.
And Kevin was actually giving him the little hint of, you're going to have to face down a lot of them.
Yeah, he's like, take the night off, Kevin. He's like, yeah, it's a good idea, Mr. Wick. I'll head off before the carnage starts. But yeah, you see him, obviously there's a cool bit in the bathroom that I mentioned earlier with him, like, you know, stabbing the guy in the reflection when the other dude can't see him. But when he starts going down his way, obviously he's doing it stealthily as possible, but eventually one of the fights breaks into, like, through the shelves in front of people, and they all start freaking out. And a lot of these people are kind of like in their swimsuits because they've been in a swimming pool. And
yeah, that's the one thing I didn't get about this nightclub, is that it's like one half nightclub, one half bathhouse. And then I'm pretty sure the top floor was like an art gallery. It just seemed like a very strange collection of buildings, all just lumped together.
It's basically, it's probably the Russian mob. You know, they like Yosef likes all this stuff, so this is everything they've put in it. So I don't know. I can't explain it. They just want a series of interesting locations for these fights to happen. So we just want them to go from one to the they want to go from one to the next to the other. So whatever. But there's a lot of fun stuff in here, and probably my favorite choreography is just this extended fight sequence where he's, you know, like you said, he has to stop to reload the gun at one point. There's a moment where he goes to fire and there's no bullets left, and he just sort of has to quickly like do shush, you know, and sort of put the new clip in, and then just immediately shoots the guy, and the guy's just not got enough time to sort of react to it and protect himself. He eventually has kind of a more sort of like serious fight with one guy who's kind of holding his own against him, and it actually throws him over a balcony onto the dance floor. I thought that thud felt really impressive. It felt like a, you know, proper stunt.
It did, but at the same time, I feel like that was an edit. I feel like it was a very well done edit, but it was still an edit. I
think there was a cut the second he hits the floor, but it actually kind of added to the impact. It was an interesting little moment as far as like the feel of it went. But there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of moving someone's arm as they're going to shoot him so that they don't hit him, and then he can take shots at them. There's a lot of that going on throughout as it's going through.
Like, that's where I feel the gun kata stuff really comes in, because you easily could have had John Wick just go up to the top balcony, keep an eye out, and then just shoot the guys as they're walking around. But they don't. They particularly get guns very close quarters. So you have to do some aspect of martial arts in order to just basically make it so the gun doesn't fire point blank range at someone's chest.
Yeah, and obviously Yosef gets away though. He's running away the whole time. He takes some of the pretty ladies he had in the pool with them and uses them as a shield for a minute before he runs
it's like
out.
every time he's on screen, the director's just like, how do we make him even more despicable? How do we make it so nobody's gonna like him by the end?
Even his own father.
Yeah.
His own father ultimately ends up just sort of giving him up just so that he can save his own life a bit later on.
I mean, if you were in his spot, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, John Wick after this scene, he's hurt, he's injured. Perkins attacks him in his hotel room. Notably, this becomes clear later on when you realize Willem Dafoe is on his side. But Willem Dafoe, because I was thinking in the moment, like, why did Willem Dafoe miss him? Because he takes a sniper shot at him when he's lying in bed, but he hits the pillow next to him, and I'm like, how did you miss that shot? He was lying still. But obviously, it's clear later on. He's trying to wake him up.
Yeah, he sees Perkins entering the room, and I thought, when I still thought that Marcus was against John, that he was waking him up because if Marcus killed him here with someone else in the room, that person could take credit for it.
Yeah.
And would get the bounty. So he was keeping him alive until it was a point where he could say, no, I'm the one who killed him. But again, that all gets turned on its head later on.
Yeah. Honestly, I do think Perkins is kind of a weak character in this. Mainly just because it feels like he wins a fight with her here, right? And he ties her up, and there's another hitman here that he knows that he's friendly with, and it is kind of funny having them just casually have a conversation as they're holding guns in their hands, just sort of being like, "Oh, how are you, John? How's it been?" And he's like, "Hey, do you want to like get a coin for keeping an eye on this one?" And he does. And then there's just a scene a little bit later where she like breaks free of her restraints and kills this guy, and then she pops up later. And most of her stuff after this is in that last like section where it feels that like we've done the main story and we're tacking on some extra stuff. So that's why I feel like everything with her feels a bit weaker, because most of it feels like it's set up for that last part of the movie where she needs to be a threat to add on to like the post main story stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in that she has that one fight scene, and then after that, she's not really a physical threat at all. She's just kind of a threat in the fact that she's pretty much a spy is all she is for the rest of the movie. She gives information to certain people and then she just dies. So I think out of all the characters in this movie, she's the one that feels the most underutilized in terms of what they gave her to begin with and what she ended up with.
Yeah, so she was a little bit thinner to me as a character, but aside from that though, like John Wick going after Vigo's money and like sort of like, oh, he's never going away, he's going to keep coming, right? In fact, we've not even mentioned Ian McShane yet somehow.
True.
Who runs the Continental, right? He's the owner of it, and tries to. He's kind of friendly with John Wick. He's like, but remember, you can't do anything on these grounds. Is this really worth doing this? And John Wick says this is personal. This is not like a contract. This is not something like that. This is personal. So
basically, he's the one who reminds John, like, hey, look, you actually got out in an industry where nobody gets out.
Yeah.
So maybe just second guess whether or not you actually want to be doing this.
Yeah, I think it's, like on some level, does he want to come back to this because he's lost like his other life that he had is effectively dead because his wife's dead and that she was the main part of that life. I think there's a little bit more to it. I'll talk about it when we get to the ending though, just for what the arc is. But he goes after Vigo's money. He finds like his church, which is a front, and like kills all the guys in there, and then burns all of the money and stuff that he had in this like vault that he had underneath this church, which obviously pisses Vigo off quite a bit.
Which I noticed, that was the one thing I was like, are you sure about that? When he burned the money, obviously bad move because he's pissing off Vigo, but also, there were just the gold coins that they use as currency. It'd be one thing to burn it. I guess that's sending a message. But at the same point, I feel like you could use those coins, even if you couldn't use the money itself.
He's sending a message. It's about burning everything he owns to the ground.
He's just doing the Joker thing from Dark Knight.
I wouldn't call it the exact same thing, but yeah. And it is kind of feel like, oh, he's unrelenting, because as soon as Vigo gets out of this scene, because John Wick's watching as they react to all this, he just comes out with the big machine gun and starts firing at him and taking out all of his henchmen. He actually gets taken down for a little bit here because I think it's the Vulture.
Someone just comes out with a car and just hits him.
Well, no, they don't hit him with a car. they hit a car that he's standing next to into him.
He's still hit by a car. That is technically still what happens.
He is hit by a car, but it's more like a game of pool where one car gets hit into another car that hits him.
True.
Which makes it more visually interesting, I would argue.
Yeah, it does. It also, I mean, that's the thing that gets me, though. I understand if you get a concussion, you get a concussion. If you're knocked out, you're knocked out. Fine. But it's strange to me where the lines are drawn in terms of what John can actually handle in terms of physical. Like, he gets stabbed, he gets grazed with bullets at times, but apparently just, you know, he's hit by a car and knocked down on the ground. That's enough.
Well, it knocks him out. And I mean, we even mentioned that after the nightclub stuff, he gets patched up and he's got all these stitches and he's told that they're going to burst if he does any physical activity. And I would say that he does a lot of physical activities after that scene.
I love the doctor in that because obviously he's the doctor for the entire Continental. He knows what's up, and he literally tells him, like, okay, if you're done, please don't move, like, anything at all. But I have a feeling you're not, so just take these for pain relief beforehand. It's not going to stop your stitches from popping, but you won't feel it, at least.
If anything, because I think the ending kind of addresses this because he goes to the vets to patch himself up, right? But I feel like those stitches should have popped, like, almost immediately. Like, because it's the fight with Perkins in his hotel room is after that doctor scene. I feel like they should have popped in that scene. He was rolling about and kicking and shit. Like, this should be done already. Do we have anything that says he didn't immediately call the doctor back and get it fixed up again after Perkins was taken care of? He could have done that. Nothing in the movie tells us he did that, though.
All right, fair enough.
I mean,
fair enough.
You could have had like one scene where he calls down to. Like, you don't have to have a scene where he's patched up. You just have to have a scene where he calls Lance Reddick and goes, "Hey, I need the doctor again."
And I know that we're physically regressing in the movie at this point, but during that Perkins scene, I forgot to mention that pretty much for the entire fight, we keep on cutting to Lance Reddick, who's calling up to the room. And he's just sitting there casually waiting on the phone. And then finally, when John answers, just like, "Oh, sorry to bother you, but we heard that there was a noise up there." And he's like, "Yeah, someone came into my room." And they're like, "Oh, do you need a dinner reservation?"
Yeah, no, all that stuff's pretty fun. But like I said, he's this force who just comes after. Like, I love how he doesn't. In some ways, you could argue it goes against the planning and strategy that he showed in the previous scenes. But he doesn't even really like form much of a plan for attacking like Vigo with all of his bodyguards around him. He just starts opening fire and just starts taking them out because he's confident that he can. Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of getting into a thing of during the nightclub scene, there is this, I don't want to say mortality to him. There's not this feeling like, oh, I might actually die here. Like, he feels pretty confident in stuff, but he is still staying aware. He is still keeping things open. This feels like such a bold move on his part of burning the money and then just coming after Vigo that it's almost like he's buying into his own mythos at that point.
To play devil's advocate, right? And not that I disagree with that point, but to play devil's advocate here, arguably this is why he fails here and gets caught, is because he's too bold. He tries something that's not that well thought out, because he's getting angry. You know, it's getting too personal almost, where he's starting to get like.
I mean, you say devil's advocate. That's the point I was making. Is I think that's the reason he lost, is that he is buying too much into his own stuff, and he's starting to be like, no, I'm going to do this, not thinking how he's going to. He just knows he will.
And he wakes up tied to a chair. Vigo's there, basically grilling him for what he's been doing, and says it was just a dog. It was just a dog in a car. Like, why are you doing all this? And that's when he gets the angry speech where he's like, no, like, I got out. I had this life, and she died, and the one bit of hope I had that maybe I could move on and survive afterwards was that dog that she gave me. And your son took that from me, killed that from me. And people keep asking if I'm back. Well, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. And then he says, if you don't give me your son, then you're going to burn with him. And Vigo gives the order to kill him, and he starts suffocating him, and he walks out of the room. And you're thinking, how's he getting out of this one? He's tied to a chair. He's got a bag over his head. And that's when the payoff of Willem Dafoe's character comes in, where he snipes the two guys, and John Wick out of the chair, and the chase comes on, and we get this car chase where he comes after Vigo. He's shooting people through the cars. He's climbing on top of the cars.
I mean, you say car chase. He I'm pretty sure in this particular scene, he lets the car drive down the road. He cuts across an alley, and then he just like jumps up on top of the hood and starts shooting at it again. It's not really so much a chase as it is a...
Well, he's chasing him while he's in a car, is what I, what I was getting at.
Oh, but me saying he gets hit by a car is too pedantic. All right.
Well, no, I wasn't. It wasn't about being pedantic. It was about leaving out the cool detail.
Oh, okay. Give you that.
The fact that it was a car into another car is what made it cool.
Okay.
So
I won't argue.
Yeah, but he ends up, he's killed all his men. I think at this point even Dean Winters has been killed, because isn't there a moment?
No, Dean shows up at the end.
Oh no, you're right, because it's later on where he gives Dean Winters a gun and says good luck. That's right, that's later on. But he holds him at gunpoint and he's like, give me your son, and he's like, and call off the contract. And he's like, okay, if I give you my son and I call off the contract, you'll let me go, right? He's like, I'll keep my word. So he's like, this is where my son is. He's at a safe house. He's got like a dozen men. They'll be waiting for you. And yeah, the next scene is literally just John Wick going to this location, taking out all the guys, and getting to, you know, Yosef, the little shit that he is. And, you know, Yosef's about to yell, it was just a dog. And John Wick kills him before he can finish his sentence. He just executes him. Which
there are two things in this scene that I want to bring up. The first of which is, this is, except for the Yosef death, this is the first scene where John is a sniper, where he is away from the action, he's away from the fight, and he's just picking them off one by one, which I think is a good aspect to have here. Of, we've been through all the close quarters combat stuff during the nightclub scene. We've seen that he can do that. It's good to see a different type of action at this point. So there's that. But then the other thing that we haven't mentioned here is the way that they handle subtitles in this movie, which is anytime that they're speaking Russian, we have the subtitles pop up on screen, but instead of it just being normal text at the bottom, it's somewhere in the middle of the frame, and the word that is emphasized is in like this neon font.
Yeah, it's not like sometimes they are just kind of normal, but there are these moments where it wants to emphasize and be more, I guess, comic booky, for lack of a better term. Where it'll kind of really emphasize, and I think like one of the moments is when Yosef's saying it was just an effing dog, but he doesn't finish the sentence. You actually get like, it's just like an effing, and like, you know, that word is like bold and like in yellow or whatever, and then the gunshot happens. But there is there's moments throughout where there's these like little moments where it'll emphasize one word like that. So, which is good because it's a bit of personality. And I want to make it clear, even though I was complaining about it being a bit too self-serious early on, I'll take that over self-aware, because like so many movies are self-aware now. I want it to be a little bit lighter, but I don't want it to be self-aware. Like I want to make that clear.
I feel like the scenes with like the police officer and Lance Reddick calling up to the room, that's the perfect level. That's where just you have this huge fight scene, or you're still having this huge fight scene, and it's just a little bit of levity once it's done, where it's like, okay, we take a breath, audience, you're good to go. It's not ruining the fight scene itself by interjecting it.
But it's not, I'm not necessarily asking for levity though. I don't want jokes. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. It's so like serious and cold at the start, you know, like just a little bit of lightness onto the tone, not so much like cracking jokes around like that. Not that those moments that are funny are out of place and don't fit, because you know, I think they do, but it's certainly, you know, I'm just saying, handling the tone, and the tone is pretty fine actually once the movie gets like proper into it, but. You know, that's what I'm thinking back to, and the reason why I'm thinking of it now is just because we're talking about the subtitle thing. Is that feels like personality? That feels like the movie's got a bit of character, and I think the movie at the start is maybe feeling like it's lacking that a little bit. Like it's almost going for like super normal dry intentionally, and maybe that's a creative choice, and I can respect maybe what they were going for with that, but they maybe done it too well because it just was a bit too dry for me.
I on my side of it, I do think it's an intentional choice, and it's basically just to show the contrast between the hitman life, which is so over the top and full of that character, compared to the life that he built with his wife, where it's just a normal life. He woke up, he paid bills, I assume he had a normal job, and that's all it was. And that's the sort of thing where it needs to be that duller color, so that when you get to the characterizing fashion of the Hitman world, it pops that much more.
Yeah, I get what it's doing. But yeah, ultimately what I'm saying with all that is just that I appreciate that it knows what it is and it's got like a goal of what it wants to be. Even if I don't necessarily think everything it hits is, I think, right or perfect for my taste. But, you know, because it does feel like it is trying to be cool. And I think it mostly succeeds in being cool, which is a compliment, because most things that try to be cool, I think, don't, you know, like, being cool should be effortless, right? And that's kind of what makes something cool, is that it's effortless. And I think when they're walking around in suits and they're trying to sound all badass, that's when it feels like it could feel try hard, but it backs it up with the action, which is the part where no effort went into this and it's actually just cool. Like, they're actually pulling off cool moments here, and it feels like, you know, so it's not just it's got bite as well as bark, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So it is worth noting that Yosef is shot at this point, and we still have 20 minutes left. Yes.
This is what I'm talking about, is that Yosef is the one that we hate, he's the one we don't like, and even though he's never going to be a threat to John, it was never going to be this, like, oh, this final fight's going to be epic when he gets to Yosef, because Yosef is, like, his match. It's not that type of movie. He's a little shithead, and you want to see him get his comeuppance. And we hit that. And obviously, Vigo afterwards, like, even though he gave up his son, he still wants to get back at John for it. And the movie tries to make us care about this by having him kill Willem Dafoe's character. That's kind of the big thing that happens here. But it kind of felt like it was trying really hard to make us care about getting Vigo now. And I never did in the same way, you know?
No. That's it. I think it's an issue of Marcus was just too underdeveloped as the friendship with John. He had the opening condolences, and then after he killed Yosef, he came up and was like, hey, you did it, now get out while you still can, like, leave this life, don't come back.
Like, I like the reveal that he was an ally, because it was like, oh, this is a nice side character that could potentially come, obviously can't now because he's dead, but this is a potential side character that could be developed in a sequel or something, that, and the relationship might be cool to explore. The dog meant more, though, because the entire thing with the dog is it wasn't just that he bonded with a dog. It was the dog that he bonded with that was like not only a gift from his wife, but the whole point was is that his wife knew he'd become cold and emotionless without something like that. So she was trying to sort of like extend that for him even after her death. So there was a lot of like narrative meaning to the dog beyond just he bonds with the dog. But then of course you have the face value of, oh, it's a cute dog, and like, you know, he watched it die. Like, it works on all the levels.
There's literally been studies about that where, you know, you can kill as many people as you want on screen, and the audience will be like, yeah, that's fine. But as soon as you kill the dog, it's like, okay, someone's got to pay for that.
Absolutely. So, you know, it never quite has that bite to it. And don't get me wrong, like, I enjoy a good fight in the rain as much as anyone, and that's, you know, where it ends up, you know. John Wick comes after Vigo, and they have there's some car stuff first, and then ultimately, like, John's killed everyone else. And I think up until this point is maybe something else they could have done to make this more exciting, is that if they'd actually even given me a hint that Vigo might be able to actually take John Wick in a fight, I might have been excited about them facing each other. But it felt like it came out of nowhere to me where, wait, you're going to fight him hand-to-hand combat? The way I feel right now is that you don't stand a chance. And I guess, you know, John, okay, he's maybe been through some fights, he's a bit injured and whatever, but I still feel like you don't stand a chance. And I never really felt like he was a proper threat.
Well, I think that's the biggest issue is in the beginning of the movie. They took the time to tell us that Vigo fears John Wick, and for good reason. There is nothing he can do. So I don't think there was any point in this movie where they could allow Vigo to stand a chance against John Wick, because he literally said that no one does. Like, so I don't...
Don't get me wrong, it leaves something for a sequel. The idea that we're going to introduce a villain, you know, and I don't know if this is spoiling anything, it makes sense that in the sequels, no, you give him the evil John Wick. You give him the one who's as good as he is on the opposite side, and that's like something you can do in a sequel, right? I get that. But in this movie, I think you can do it. I think you can slightly reframe how Vigo reacts to make it work. You have him scared because, oh, my son's effed, because my son can't fight him, right? I know I can technically take him on, but I would rather not escalate to that conflict because I know that he's my match. I know that this is like a mano-a-mano type thing. And if me and John go to war, we're going to destroy each other because we're of a similar skill level. But it never feels like that in the rest of the movie.
No.
But this final fight scene almost does feel like, oh, they are maybe equals in a fight because they're kind of going toe-to-toe.
Yeah, the only thing that I think that they try to do, it is worth noting, one bit of trivia I saw is there were many alternate cuts of this final fight scene.
Okay.
One of which is John just shoots Vigo and leaves. So, yeah, they at multiple points were like, no, this doesn't make sense that this character can last for too long against John. And I think that's why, for whatever reason, and I think this is the decision that makes the least sense, John agrees to do it just fist fight. He tosses his gun and they just fist fight in the rain, which, yes, John has many ways to kill a man just with his own fists, but it is a lot harder to kill a man with just your fists. But then halfway through the fight, they introduce the knife as well, which I think evens out the skill levels.
I think it's a problem that they've put themselves into at the end, because you're talking about how those alternate cuts, and at one point they had John just shoot him, and that feels like the most right thing based on the rest of the movie. But I understand also why they didn't want to do that, because the problem is that you're tacking on this extra sort of part after you've already killed the main bad guy that the audience all cares about dying. I think the problem there is that if he just shoots him, it feels like we've had Unstoppable John Wick the whole movie, and you've tacked on this extra bit at the end, and he just sort of succeeds with no like difficulty at the end again. It feels like at that point, it maybe no. If you're going to tack on another bit, it has to be something that actually challenges him. It just doesn't feel like the challenge is earned, because this character's not really, I don't know, he's not embodied that throughout the movie, I guess.
I guess the thing that, as an audience, you have to wonder whether or not you deserve, whether or not the movie has to have the final fight be the big fight, whether or not it has to be the emotional crescendo. Because obviously, if we're talking about the person who needed to die, he wasn't a threat at all. He went down with the single bullet and no punches thrown. He was literally the weakest character, but he was the one that needed to die the most. In contrast, I'd say the hardest fight that John actually had in the whole movie was the guy who threw him over the railing in the nightclub scene. Yeah. And that guy, I don't even think he had a name. He had a few spoken lines. He actually managed to be a character for a while, but when he did end up dying, it was nothing to the plot.
Yeah, but it felt like a bigger deal, kind of, in a way, because just through going toe-to-toe with John Wick in the way he did for a couple of minutes, gave us, like, because that was his sole character, it was like, oh, this is a guy that's actually holding his own for a little bit, and that's his entire thing. So it felt like we learned through just the action scene what we need to know about him, and you know, in the scene itself. Whereas Vigo's got all this other stuff throughout the whole movie, so it feels out of place, and he's also, I don't know if he's that much older, because Keanu Reeves is maybe like 50 already by the time he's making this movie, but he seems a little bit older. He's a bit grayer than Keanu is.
For sure.
So, I mean, to answer that question you posed there, should the last fight be the emotional crescendo? I don't think it has to be the biggest fight. It doesn't have to be the most bombastic. It doesn't have to be the most impressive fight from an action standpoint. But I think the emotional crescendo, it should be. I think the way you restructure it a little bit to make that happen is you have to have him, if you want to have a fight at the end, you have to have the fight at the end being what John has to get through to get his hands on Yusuf. The fact that he got his hands on Yusuf already, and this is kind of like an aftermath of that, just feels a bit weird. Like I say, this last 15-20 minutes just feels oddly kind of tacked on. And don't get me wrong, Vigo is this dangling thread that he's still around, but I just don't think it's... I'm just not that excited about getting to him at the end, you know?
Yeah, no, they do nothing to really set up that... Because that's the thing, is that Vigo says, oh, you'll leave me alone, whatever. And to be fair, I think that if Vigo had killed Marcus, because Marcus, he said he'd take the contract, and then he obviously defended John. So in their honor-bound system, I feel that there is some reason that Marcus should be allowed to die. Maybe, you know, it wouldn't be good, but whatever. I think the only reason that John has to go then kill Vigo is because Vigo gloats about it. He calls up John and says, I killed your friend, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the only thing that sets him, in the story at least, as a reason for him to die.
Honestly, it's actually more interesting to me that he weaseled out and gave up his son and then feels bad about it. Honestly, I think obviously you'd have to change the second movie, and I think the second movie is good, so I'm not saying that they should change the second movie, but in the context of this movie before the second one exists, I think the character of Viggo is more interesting to me if he's still around in the world and has this weird shame that he let his son be killed by John Wick because he's scared of John Wick, and have him like, you could have him almost be someone that the main villain in a sequel, if not the second, maybe a later sequel, like a main villain in a later sequel goes to for help against John Wick because he has a vendetta, he has a grudge. Like you could have left that dangling, and I don't think it'd have felt that weird.
I mean, I think they even set up the reasons why he'd still be a good villain in the movie, is that John burned all of his blackmail against the city. So immediately after this movie, if he's still alive, he's rapidly losing power. He's rapidly losing his stance in the world.
If anything, like the way you would have probably written the second one, and again, none of this is a knock on the second one. I'm just purely speaking from the context of this movie on its own. But if you were planning a sequel for the second one and keeping Viggo alive, you would assume the sequel's plot would probably be Viggo using whatever resources he has to hire the match for John Wick to take him out. Like whoever could take out John Wick, that's who he wants, and that's who he's going to go after. But yeah, it's kind of strange. It's the
one movie that it reminds me of, and I don't know if you've seen this, the original Taken.
Ah, yeah, I've seen Taken. It's been a while, but yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, so at the very end of the movie, spoilers for Taken, I guess, there is the fight scene between Liam Neeson and, like, the big muscle, the big guy. And it takes him a lot of effort to get through the muscle. He is all beaten up, he's horribly beaten down, but he does manage to get through. But then at the very end, there's the rich guy. There's, like, the guy who actually is the one who needs to be punished here. But he's old and frail, and Liam Neeson just shoots him. And it's like, that's it. That's the end of it. And I feel like that's kind of what needed to happen here for Viggo's end fight to be a thing, is that I don't feel that John Wick was properly beaten up on his way to Viggo. I feel like he managed to pretty much stay on top of things. So then by the time they got to Viggo, that's where he had to be beaten up. And that's why they gave Viggo the knife. That's why they had John gets stabbed, and it's only in the end of that it allowed it to be. This is
only addressing the problem that I don't think is the problem, though. This is addressing it not being the biggest action climax compared to the rest of the movie. This is not addressing the emotional climax issue. I don't think that any of that solves the fact that we don't care as much about this, and it feels kind of tacked on because we care more about Yosef being killed. So I think Yosef has to be killed at the end, and you have to go through whatever the final fight is to get to Yosef. And that'll give it stakes. That'll give it the feeling that we care about it as an audience. That's the part that's missing.
So let me ask you this. Let's say that the movie was slightly restructured and everything still played out, but Yosef managed to escape the safe house and get back to his dad. And then everything else in the movie happens the exact same. They kill Marcus. They're going to fly away. They're going to leave via chopper. And he's taking his son with him. And then the exact same fight scenes play out. But then as soon as Viggo is killed, he walks over to the car where Yosef still is and then kills him there. Do you think that that's a better structure?
It's better. I mean, you would still have some problems of, like, does Viggo feel like he should be able to take on John in a fight? I think it's still a valid criticism. I think it's the second criticism. I think the first criticism was the emotional climax. I think if after that fight with Viggo, he walks over and finally gets his hands on Yosef, it makes the crescendo of the emotional climax, the build to what we've been waiting for. It would make all that feel more important and make it all feel like it is the actual ending to the movie, as opposed to being after the ending to the movie, like it does now.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely fair. I agree that is probably the one pacing issue that I will give the movie, is that it's just the ending's in the wrong spot.
Yeah. So, it sounds like I'm ragging on it a lot here. We're critiquing, I think, what are the valid problems with the movie, and what is otherwise a really solid action film. But I do think this is, like, it really much, like, I do remember liking John Wick 2 more, and I expect to like it more again now that we watch it. And I think part of it is because it feels like you have this kind of simple, slightly flawed movie that sets up the world, but all the potential's there for, like, the better movie to come along and nail the pacing, nail the big bad, nail all the elements that are going to make it the right John Wick story. And, I'm not saying 2 is the best one, because I've not seen 3, and 4 might be amazing when it comes out. I have no idea. we'll see. We'll see how it progresses. But I think this has great action scenes. It has a pretty interesting world that it sets up, but it does have some pacing issues. Particularly the ending feels like weirdly tacked on after the fact. But
yeah,
that's kind of where I am at it. It's good with some flaws. And I see why people are into it and why they like it. I kind of like it for the same reasons, but I do also think it was put on a bit of a pedestal when it came out. That was maybe just a little too high up. But
yeah, I can see that.
So it feels like I'm being like a negative Nancy, but it's just because I think it's good. It's just not quite that amazing.
I mean, audience, you can obviously interpret that as he hates John Wick. This franchise will be below the Santa Claus in all things. So.
No. This is better than all the Santa Claus movies, so let's not pretend otherwise. But
I guess, should we just say how the movie actually officially ends?
Oh, sure, yeah. I was about to go into the ratings, but you're right. So we see him arrive at the vet, and he's watching the video of his wife, and he keels over like he's letting himself die. And I think this is where it kind of wraps around and makes his arc kind of complete. Is that I think the reason why his wife gave him the dog is she didn't want him to just give up. She wanted him to keep on living, and this was a sort of way to help him do that. And at this moment here, he's literally dying, and it seems like he is dying on the road next to the vet, and it feels like he has died. But he then chooses to get up and keep living. And I think him getting in and finding a new dog that looks like he needs an owner, he's like, this is a dog for me.
It's important he goes into the vet not for a dog foremost. It's to get the staple gun to close his stitches again.
Well, yeah. But that's like, the point is he chooses to live. And part of that is he chooses a new dog to sort of help him through this going forward. So it's he's making the choice his wife wanted to make. He just had to go through all this turmoil. So this is why I'm saying that if there was never a sequel to this movie, this ending would be perfect for him. It's that he's choosing to live the healthy way after this. He's dealt with the thing that interrupted his life, and he's done with it. But he's taken the dog, the new dog, and he's going to go and do what his wife wanted to do, which is to live with this, this friend who's going to help him through it. So that's ultimately what the ending is. He's just choosing to live and not just give up, and whatever that means for him. So that works. It's this simple. It's effective.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense from where the movie set it up, and they do have a nice little moment here of we see him playing this video of his wife a few times. Yeah. And they keep on saying he keeps on ending watching it with the wife saying, "Come on, let's go home," and that's like the phrase that gets him back on his feet at the end of the movie. Is the wife says, "Come on, let's go home," and that's where he like stands up and just starts walking again. Yeah, I think that it is a good closure to the entire thing of he's going through, he's getting the new dog and all that.
I will say, I'm not sure.
The only thing that sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not sure you need to show some of it at the start of the movie though. I feel like that was maybe just to try and because a lot of TV shows do this where they'll show you a little bit of the ending at the start of an episode and then go 48 hours earlier, how are we going to get to that point? I don't think you needed it, but
it easily could have just been if any video editor wants to take those first 30 seconds and just put them back in where they're supposed to go, it's going to work just as fine as the movie. It was literally, it's just the eye catch so that when you're going into the movie and it opens up with him, going to his wife's funeral and then his dog dies and then you have to wait 30 minutes for him to actually fire a gun. It's like, no, trust us guys, there will be action. Like, they thought people would just walk out of the theater. But no, the only issue I really have with the ending is that the last shot of the movie is just him walking with the dog down like the pier or something like that. And then it just cuts to city shots as the credits start. And I feel like I could have used I don't know what else, but just like one more shot, one extra thing. I don't even know what I'm looking for, but it just felt a bit too sudden of a cutoff for me.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't know, maybe I'm sitting down in bed and the dog sitting next to him or something.
Maybe like going back to the graveyard or something like that, and that's where the last shot of him walking the dog is. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they do a specific thing of showing him lay down his wife's bracelet and the dog's collar both on his nightstand. So maybe something with that. I don't know. I just feel like there was one extra shot missing where it could have really laid out the emotional closure, but this one, it just felt like a very sudden stop.
Maybe he goes to the store and buys a bunch of cement mixture.
Maybe he gets some kibble.
I guess some kibble. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the point I was making is he's going to, like, you know, put all that floor back in that he smashed with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
He's going to cover up his secret life again. But yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a really solid movie. It was ahead of the time for giving people a thing that was kind of missing in movies, like just straight up action movies that weren't superhero movies were just kind of gone for a long time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say there's that many of them now still, but this, at least one franchise has been able to kind of like, hey, we can have this. I think it's this and Mission Impossible. And Mission Impossible, I will say, I've said it before, I'll say it again, and we're going to do those next year for the last one coming out, is
yes,
that franchise kind of found a new life, and I think the reason why it's been so successful, like from 4 onwards, is because instead of just doing lots of CG, that franchise is based entirely around stunts. It's stunt action.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like there are 3 different types of action movies. There's stunt, there's the like disaster movie where it's just big action set pieces of the world falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this, which is the choreography action movie. And I think that's what was missing the longest.
And most superhero falls into, I mean, you call it disaster. I don't know if I use that word, but given what you mean by that, the superhero falls into that category.
Yeah, absolutely.
By and large. So, yeah, John Wick. I suppose we should rate the movie then.
Sure. I don't suppose I can get you to go first.
Never.
Of course. Okay. So I don't want to go too high because, yes, there are a little bit of pacing issues, and this is a very well told story. It does a great job of laying out the characters. It makes it clear who John wants revenge on, and everything is just crystal clear laid out. I know in a lot of action movies, especially we were complaining with Turtles, it just gets muddied when you throw in too much too quick. This does a fantastic job of making sure everything is crystal clear. Mm-hmm. And you were talking at the very beginning about the geography of knowing where each fight scene led into the next, and it was very clear in that. I always kept a good sense of that. I feel that this movie was made by people who know these stunts, know these sort of action movies, and know what is required to make them good. So the only real pacing that you come into, or the only real issue you come into, is the pacing.
It almost feels like the plot is secondary to like just the type of scenes that they wanted to do in an action movie, and then the plot was kind of written around achieving those.
But it never felt contrived. It never felt like, oh, how are we going to end him up at a nightclub? We'll have him just happen to know the nightclub owner who just happens to call him and say that. That's like, no, it makes sense that he ends up every place that he ends up. So overall, in terms of rating, I'm going to give this one, I'm between an 8 and an 8.5, and I think I'm going to go with the 8, just so I have some room to grow, if you're saying that the second one is actually better.
Yeah, Joe, is so funny. I just noticed the name in the credits there. And I think it was probably the doorman, actually, now I'm thinking about it. Because you only see like part of his face, the way it's shot. It's kind of like an over the shoulder from the front, where you're mainly focused on John Wick and you're just seeing like part of his face for most of the scene. We've got another connection to a Turtles movie, because that is apparently Kevin Nash, the wrestler who played Super Shredder. Yeah. Now I'm thinking about it, yeah, because he's got like obviously the silver hair and beard now versus like what he used to look like. Now I'm thinking about it. He's in the credits though, so
yeah,
as another Turtles connection.
Oh boy, everything coming up Turtles.
Yeah, we got a connection to classic Turtles. We got a connection to modern Turtles.
So clearly, John Wick 4 is just going to be Heroes in a Half Shell.
Of course. For the record, we never mentioned Perkins, and she gets assassinated by Ian McShane and a bunch of his men for breaking the rules of the Continental.
It honestly comes out of nowhere as well. It's just she gets a call, she goes to a random location, Ian McShane walks out saying like, you broke the rules, bye, and then just gets shot.
Yeah, yeah.
I said 8. What do you got?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Yeah, I'm going 7. 7 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
On John Wick. It's good. It's a good movie. Good action scenes. Pretty typical plot, but you know it builds its character pretty well. Some of the action scenes are quite memorable, and the world that it's introduced seems ripe for more exploration, and that's obviously what the sequels are going to get into. So, yeah. So, yeah, we'll get into John Wick 2 next time. Also worth mentioning, the bonus episode to go along with this for this month, for also with this theme, is we're doing Peppermint, the Jennifer Garner action movie. We basically said, okay, what's the sort of John Wicky, not a knockoff per se, but just sort of some sort of revenge story.
Ballerina isn't out yet, so what can we do as an extra?
Yes, and we went with Peppermint for whatever reason. But so that's
one thing.
Yeah,
our secondary rating scale, does it make the cut?
Oh yeah, it makes a cut.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know if you were gonna push for the extra, like
cut above.
Cut above, yeah.
No, I think this one just makes the cut. I think this is good. I don't think it's, amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it's worth checking out. I definitely think that it is. I'd say it's a must-have for anyone who enjoys a good choreographed action film.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
I don't think that it's just a must-have for anyone who enjoys cinema as a whole.
Yeah. I think that's fair. So, wait, hold on a second. Hold on. Is this another connection to another franchise we've done?
I mean, it's just going to start happening more and more as we continue.
I know,
on.
but it's like we've only had a few so far.
Yeah.
And I'm just. I may be wrong on this one. Let me just do a little quick check.
Well, also here. Hey, everybody.
No,
we have a Patreon?
No. I was imagining things. All right, never mind.
All right, fair enough.
So anyway, this has been John Wick. So yes, as I was mentioning, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. You can support us over there and get bonus content. $3 a month will get you access to the bonus episode, which for this month is Peppermint, but there's been one for each month since we've started the show. So there's a little back catalogue starting to form. They're usually tangentially related to whatever the main theme is of the month, but sometimes they're more tied than others. Obviously, the $5 tier, you also get access to Collector's Cut Extra Reels, which is another bonus episode where we'll do some sort of so bad it's good B movie. Well, hopefully,
Yeah.
So far we've had good recommendations and they've all panned out. But I mean, eventually we're going to hit some probably less
actual trash.
Yeah. But so far on that we've done Miami Connection and Deadly Prey, which are both hoots to varying degrees. So check out those. And of course, you can support us simply by liking, subscribing, dinging the bell, rating the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. All that stuff does help. And just to wrap up, I will thank our Patreon producers. So thank you to Tyler Hesson, the Palacias, Board Now, Christopher Moy, David Brown, and Al Tribesman. And thank you to everyone who supports us in any way. But that's the show. So hopefully you enjoyed us having a look at John Wick, and we'll be back next time with John Wick 2. And you know what? Credit for using numbers, because so many franchises now are scared of putting numbers in their titles. I appreciate the simple naming format. I really do.
Right up until they break it with Chapter 3 / Parabellum.
At least it's still a number, though. It's still a number.
Yeah.
Like I see you have to do the thing where like John Wick 5 is just John Wick : like the final Wick or something like that. I'll be pissed. Yeah. I'll be pissed at that.
It's gonna just be called Wick, and then you're also going to have like the next movie, which is just going to be called like The John Wick.
Oh God, no! Don't.
Just to really screw with you.
Yeah, just you wait until we do Fast and the Furious, because I am going to go on a rant about those titles. Anyway, that's the show. That's Big Collector's Cut. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Keep watching movies, and I'm thinking I'm back.